Morning, guys. I hope you're all doing well. This is my fourth attempt at a video to try and run over what the content was of our first assignment, that having to do with Realpolitik as it manifested in the Italian unification and German unification efforts. So I'm hoping this effort goes through. I've been having some technical issues, so here we go. So to begin with, we need to step back in time. Of course, context is really important. And in this instance, we go back to 1853, and indeed even before that. Up until 1853, you may recall there was something called the Concert of Europe. So this is following the Congress of Vienna, when these major powers in Europe, these monarchies, agreed they wanted to maintain a status quo and that they were basically going to work together to keep down all of these new isms: liberalism, radicalism, republicanism, and of course nationalism. And by and large, they were successful with that. We know that there were a couple hiccups along the way, like with revolutions in 1830 and 1848. So at any rate, back up to 1853, this is the year when that concert of Europe falls apart. For the first time, major powers engage each other in war. And the conflict in this instance is the Crimean War. So this is a conflict that begins effectively with Russia. As you may remember, Russia has been trying for a long time to weaken the Ottoman Empire, which really contested Russian efforts to dominate the Black Sea. And so in order to weaken the Ottoman Empire, Nicholas I, the Tsar at the time, started standing up for the interests of Christians, particularly Orthodox Christians that lived in the Ottoman Empire. And this all came to a head in 1853 and led to a war. So, interestingly, the Ottoman Empire was backed up by a couple major European powers, neither of whom wanted Russia to be able to gain any influence or gain any land or power in that region. And these two powers were France under Napoleon III and then Great Britain. So when the Ottoman Empire, fearing that the Russians were going to attack, declared war, the British and the French jumped in on the side of the Ottomans against the Russians. Now, what does this have to do with the unification of Italy and of Germany? Well, again, as we know, if we're going to create a Germany, if we're going to create an Italy, that is going to affect the interests of some of these great powers. And there's going to have to be conflict in order for that to happen. And so this conflict right here really brought about the end of this concert of Europe and meant that, well, we've had conflict once, we can have conflict again. Now, here's where the Italian unification really gets a boost from, interestingly, this Crimean War. The Italian leadership up in the north, in the country of Piedmont, Sardinia, realized that if they were going to be able to bring about Italian unification, they were going to need to weaken the Austrians, because the Austrians had the territory that Venice is in today, and of course that is Italian territory. Furthermore, if they were going to fight against the Austrians, the Piedmontese Sardinians, led by Camille de Cavour, this liberal prime minister, realized that it'd be really handy to have the help of the French, who had, at that time, what everybody pretty much considered to be the most powerful army on the continent of Europe. And so, in order to curry favor with Napoleon III, the Piedmontese decided, we're going to help out in the Crimean War. And so not only were the French and British fighting against the Russians in Crimea, but the Piedmontese sent forces up there as well. And indeed, Napoleon III appreciated it. So now that conflict, of course, is going to end poorly for the Russians. Nicholas will actually die before the war is over, and his son, Tsar Alexander II, a reform-minded Tsar, is going to have to come in and negotiate the unpleasant end to that conflict. Now we can set that conflict aside, and we fast forward to Italy's efforts to unify. Now, where does Realpolitik play into this? So again, the Austrians occupy part of northern Italy, and that's a problem for Italian unification. Down in the south, there's the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and then of course we have Papal States kind of up the Apennine Peninsula a ways. So there's a lot to unite here and a lot standing in the way. So in order to bring about this unification, Cavour in Piedmont, Sardinia realizes, well, we've got to get the Austrians out of northern Italy. Now the Austrians, Austria-Hungary, of course, is this vast multinational empire having Slavic peoples in it, German-speaking peoples in it, the Magyars, who are, again, do you remember who they are? They're Hungarians in it. And then, and so we've got this big multinational empire, and of course their army was made up of people from throughout this empire, and that included Italians. Cavour had been encouraging people, or men rather, who were in the Austro-Hungarian army to leave the Austro-Hungarian army and to join the Piedmontese army. This, of course, annoyed the Austrian-Hungarian leadership, Franz Josef, to no end. And so the Austrians warned Piedmont, stop this. We do not want you taking our Italian soldiers, and if you keep doing this, there are going to be consequences. And with that, Cavour realized, well, perfect. Here's my excuse for starting a conflict. And so the Piedmontese continued to encourage Italians to leave the Austro-Hungarian army and to join the Piedmontese army. And so finally the Austrians said, that's it, this is war, and they went to war. And it's here where then Cavour was able to call upon this French help, and of course the French were not big fans of the Austrians either. So Napoleon III jumped into this conflict, sent troops to northern Italy, joined the Piedmontese, and in two big battles, Magenta and Solferino, the Austrian armies were defeated. And that meant that the Piedmontese could take that part of northern Italy. Very nice. We're on our path to Italian unification. And of course, you see, this is brilliant Realpolitik. Not only do we have war involved here, but also trickery. The Piedmontese did not even have to declare war. It was declared for them by the Austrians. Now we head to the south of Italy, and here too there are efforts underway to bring down the Kingdom of Two Sicilies and to unify Italy. But this effort is being led by Garibaldi and his red shirts, or Garibaldi and his 1,000. Call them what you will. They are fighting in Sicily, and they are fighting really a guerrilla campaign. And they're finding a lot of support because the Kingdom of Two Sicilies was very weak. It was very poor. Southern Italy is still quite poor by European standards. And the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, frankly, just collapsed. So with that, Garibaldi is heading northward up the Apennine or Italian Peninsula. Then the Piedmontese are heading south down this peninsula. And they kind of meet roughly in the middle, and here's where Garibaldi and the Piedmontese forces come face to face. And they've got to decide, what are we going to do? In negotiations then, it is Garibaldi who, again, in keeping with Realpolitik, realizes, okay, I'd like to have a Republican Italy, but I know I'm not going to have that. My number one goal is, of course, to have a unified Italy, and so therefore I will set aside my my Republican goals, and then at least we can have a united Italy. And so that is what then happened. So now we have a unified Italy through the Realpolitik approaches of Cavour in the north with Piedmont, Sardinia, and Garibaldi in the south. Now let's go to Germany. In Germany, the situation is pretty different, right? We have all of these German states, but there's a real divide here too between northern Germany, which is dominated by Prussia, and the other states up there are really quite positively predisposed toward Prussia. And then we have the southern German states, the biggest of which was, I believe, Bavaria, led by their eccentric king, sometimes called Mad Ludwig, Ludwig II, who loved romantic opera and all things romantic, including, of course, big castles and chateaux, which he built at great expense, putting Bavaria into deep, deep debt, which, of course, Bismarck is going to exploit eventually. At any rate, Bismarck is, of course, our conservative Prussian nobleman. He's not one of the high Junkers, but still, he ranks up there. And the king in Prussia is Wilhelm, or William I, who, again, loves Prussia, isn't really, thinking about wanting to be a king or an emperor of Germany. He's going to become it, but that's not like his prime objective. For Bismarck and for Wilhelm, though, they want to make Prussia stronger, and Wilhelm wants to be able to expand the military. Liberals in Prussia were opposed to that because that meant more government spending, more taxes, and of course liberals, business people, they don't like taxes. So at any rate, person after person is asked by Wilhelm to be the chancellor, the prime minister, and he says, I want the money for a bigger military. And a couple different people try this and they fail in parliament. So the parliament in Prussia is just not going to support more taxes. So these prime ministers step down, and finally Wilhelm looks around and finds Bismarck. Definitely not his first pick, but he says, well, Bismarck, here are my objectives. I want a bigger military. Can you make this happen? And Bismarck says, I'll make it happen. And indeed he does. Effectively, Bismarck simply goes against Parliament, ignores the Constitution, and simply collects taxes. These taxes were never appropriately approved, but the Prussian people paid them nevertheless. And with that, Wilhelm I was able to expand and especially update and modernize his military, which will, of course, serve him well in the coming years. So this is our first step of Realpolitik. Bismarck simply flaunts the constitutional order and gets what he wants, regardless of what the Constitution or what Parliament said. Next, then, Bismarck realizes, okay, so now we're expanding our military, we're strengthening it, modernizing it. What do we need to do next to strengthen Prussia? Bismarck, like Wilhelm, is a proud Prussian. He is not a nationalist, but he realizes that to strengthen Prussia, we need to unify Germany under us. That will make us a much bigger player on the European scene, and it is certainly going to put the Austrians in a very much secondary position. And so Bismarck starts scheming about how can we get these southern German states in particular to join us. And he realizes this is going to take conflict and war, or as he says, Blut und Eisen, blood and iron. The first conflict then is with Denmark. So Denmark wanted to expand its holdings in Schleswig and Holstein. It already had Schleswig. It wanted to expand into Holstein. There was a German ethnic minority up there. They felt rather disadvantaged up there. And what Bismarck got the Danish to do was basically to invade Holstein. Bismarck said, this is a casus belli, this is a cause of war. And so he marched off on behalf of this ethnic German minority. And of course, here we see Bismarck playing a nationalism card. All the while, he is going to get the support of the Austrians in what ends up being a sort of occupation. So Prussia will then occupy what's called Schleswig, which is the province to the north, and just south of it is Holstein, and that is where the Austrians are going to move in. So the Austrians will occupy that territory. Now again, this is a long ways away from Austria, and with this, Bismarck knows he can foment some discord up there. And indeed he does that. He gets people in Holstein to start protesting against the Austrian presence up there, even though he's the one who involved Austria in this conflict. So with that, he gets some protests up there. The Austrians say, well, this is unacceptable. And so the Austrians start marching more soldiers up there into Holstein to kind of put down these protests and these rebellions. Bismarck now, in a really duplicitous manner, says, oh, the Austrians are declaring war, which is absolutely not what they were doing, but it was the excuse he needed. Now, why is it that he wants to fight with Austria? It's because he needed to show to these southern German states that Austria was weak. The southern German states have a fear of France. And this fear goes back to Louis XIV, where his armies marched into southern Germany. And of course, this fear also goes back to Napoleonic times. And so he needs to show the southern German states that, hey, if you think Austria is going to defend you against French aggression and French incursions, you're going to have to think again. So when Austria is heading up to Holstein, Bismarck says, you are going to war, Austria. I'm going to fight against you. And indeed, he does that. Now, interestingly, Bismarck is doing this against the wishes of his king. Wilhelm said, we shouldn't be going to war against the Habsburgs. They're not our enemies. And Bismarck's like, sir, yes, we do need to be going against them in war. And what Bismarck would always do to his king, who frequently disagreed with him, is he threatened to resign. And every time Bismarck threatened to resign, the king said, okay, we'll do what you want, Bismarck. And this is going to come to haunt him in the end. But regardless, for now, Bismarck is going to keep getting his way. This was a very short war. It's called the 7 Weeks War. It was over in 7 weeks, largely because of new weaponry, new guns, and also because the Prussians were able to move their troops and supplies around very quickly by rail. It was the first big conflict where that happened. At any rate, after 7 weeks of fighting was done, interestingly, drunken with success, King Wilhelm now wanted to march on Vienna, and Bismarck said, no, sir, we have shown everybody what we need to show. We've defeated the Austrians in battle. We do not need to invade Austria-Hungary itself. So at any rate, Wilhelm stepped back, he calmed down, and the war was over. So of course this caused some bad blood between Austria-Hungary and Prussia, but it could have been much worse for Austria-Hungary, and so for that reason, their anger was not super high, and their thirst for revenge was not as great as it could have been. So now we've had 2 wars, but we've got to have a third war, Bismarck figured, in order to bring this unity about, and this war needs to involve France. Again, France is the power that really makes the southern Germans feel vulnerable. And it's this feeling of vulnerability that Bismarck wants to exploit to get them to join in a union with the Prussians. And so we need a war. How's he going to make that war happen? Well, it just so happened that at this time, the Spanish monarch died, and he had no heir to the throne. And so the Spaniards were looking around for somebody to accept the throne. And who they found was that there was this available Hohenzollern, a member of the Prussian royal family who could step on the throne. And I always forget if this guy was a cousin or a nephew of King Wilhelm I, but regardless, he was offered the throne. And of course, this guy was excited. Yeah, sure, I'd love to be the king of Spain. But Wilhelm said, no. That's going to lead to conflict with the Austrians and others, and especially it's going to lead to conflict with France, because that would mean France then has a Prussian to the north of them, to the northeast of them, and they'd have a Prussian on the Spanish throne to the south of them. And France doesn't want to be surrounded by Hohenzollerns. So Wilhelm quickly withdrew his relative's wish to be on the throne, and Bismarck's like, well, why did you do that? This is exactly what we need. We need to anger the French. And so Bismarck got the Spanish to offer it again. And this time the French really got angry. And they went to Wilhelm I and they said, we do not want this guy on the throne. And Wilhelm's like, yes, I totally agree. I see where you're coming from. We won't do that. And so again, that relative's candidature for the throne was withdrawn. And Bismarck again is wishing that his plans could simply go through. And so he gets the Spaniards to offer it to him again. And this time the French said, we want written assurances that there will be no Hohenzollern on the throne. And so a French ambassador goes off to a spa town called Ems, E-M-S. And at Ems, that ambassador speaks with Wilhelm I. And Wilhelm I says, yep, this is what we're going to do. And he sends then a telegram off to Bismarck saying, I want this telegram made public. And Bismarck looks at the telegram and says, no, this is completely the wrong message. We need something that is going to anger the French. And so Bismarck, over dinner, sits there, scribbles out certain parts of this telegram. I don't think he added any words, but he scratched entire lines out and made this message sound like a slap in the face to Napoleon III. He then followed the king's orders, made it public, but he made especially sure that this was made public to the French press. The French newspapers published this. They noted that their emperor had been insulted, and at this time, around late 1860s, France was going through a bit of an economic slowdown. People were frustrated with Napoleon III, and Napoleon III thought, I've just been insulted. That isn't good, but maybe I've got an opportunity here to win the support of my people with a successful little war against these upstart Prussians. And so he declares war on the Prussians, just exactly what Bismarck wanted. So Prussia marches off to war against the French, and the French did not know what hit them. At Sedan in particular, the French were absolutely clobbered, and indeed Napoleon III was captured in the battle. So now we need these southern German states to be joining the Prussians, and indeed they did. They viewed France as once again being an aggressor. They turned to the Prussians as their only real defender, the only country powerful enough to really support them, and they joined the Prussians in this effort against the French, even though really their efforts were not needed. More importantly, they recognized the importance of a union with the Prussians, And so they agreed to a union or to an empire with the Prussians as the main unifying force. Now, this French defeat was bad enough for Napoleon III, having been arrested. But what was really brutal was the humiliation that came afterward. This humiliation is going to play a very big role coming up. First of all, in 1871, when this war was finished, the Prussian states gathered at Versailles, outside of Paris, in Louis XIV's amazing palace, to have their signing ceremony that created the German Empire. Yeah, so get this. Germany is created on French turf in their most hallowed palace. That, of course, was humiliating. But of course, with any conflict, there also has to be a peace treaty. And the peace treaty was negotiated in the city of Frankfurt. It's called the Treaty of Frankfurt. Nice name, right? And the elements of this peace treaty are really, really key. Again, this is hammered out between Bismarck and Napoleon III. And what this treaty provided for was, first of all, France lost territory. Two provinces called Alsace and Lorraine, Alsace-Lorraine, if you will, in English. They're right along the Rhine River, where today, and back then as well, the city of Strasbourg is. This was an ethnically mixed area, but it had been a part of France now for at least a couple hundred years. And Bismarck said, we want it. And so Germany took this territory on the west side of the Rhine River. It wasn't the only territory that they had west of the Rhine, but this was French to the French people. So that was humiliating. But then on top of this, the French were forced to pay reparations. So you've got to keep in mind that it was Bismarck who effectively tricked Napoleon III into declaring war. Bismarck wanted war all along, and of course, the Prussians won this war, primarily on French turf. Nevertheless, the Prussians insisted that France pay reparations, millions and millions and millions worth of dollars. And so this treaty was truly a humiliating element for France, and of course it's not going to be forgotten. When World War I ends, all of these humiliations that took place in Versailles and then these stipulations of the Treaty of Frankfurt will come back and be visited upon the Germans, and of course you could multiply how bad it was by about 100 or so. So that is my summary of Realpolitik with these two conflicts. And this is my first video post besides my test. I hope you find this helpful. And I will be posting homework here very soon regarding our new unit on imperialism. Thank you.